Continuing the trend of airlines being established in the wake of deregulation, Starflyer burst on the scene in the mid-2000s, navigating through the turbulent Japanese airline market, which would see them gradually make a niche for themselves. My name is Ethan, and in this installment of History of Japanese Airlines, we'll be discussing the rise of Starflyer. Without further ado, let's get into it. As we're all familiar with, Japan previously had tight regulations in regards to fares and select route licensing. These regulations allowed for Japan Airlines to be the exclusive international carrier, along with setting standard fare prices and needing to seek approval from the Japanese Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism, also known as the MITT for short, to operate specific routes. Gradually, following the West's lead, Japan began their own moves towards a deregulated airline market. By the end of the 1990s, the last of the tight regulations would be lifted, which would allow a wave of new airlines to be established, including the aforementioned Skymark, Airdo, and more. While Starflyer wouldn't be a part of the initial wave, they'd be established in the following years. Starflyer would be established by Takaaki Hori in December 2002 as Kobe Airways. Takaaki was a former ANA executive, and he'd take up the mantle as senior vice president, whilst Shinobu Osaku would be appointed as president. As you can probably tell by the name, Kobe Airways planned to operate from the upcoming Kobe Airport, which was in development at the time. Kobe Airways was to offer a more hybrid style of service, bridging the gap of being a low-cost carrier and a full-service carrier. The airline's headquarters were to initially be based in Kobe. However, a year later in December 2003, the offices would be relocated to Kitakyushu, after the airline would change its name to Starflyer in May 2003. Starflyer planned to incorporate services between the upcoming new Kitakyushu Airport and Tokyo Haneda Airport with 12 round trips per day, along with adding flights between Seoul, Shanghai, and Beijing from Kitakyushu, once the Haneda route was fully operational, using a fleet of 3 A320s. A preliminary leasing agreement for 3 brand new A320s would be secured from General Electric Capital Aviation Services in the latter half of 2004. Everything was looking up and up for the airline, however, unfortunately, Shinobu Osaku, who also doubled as the main driving force behind the construction of new Kitakyushu Airport, would pass away in 2005. Yasuhiro Muto, who was a former Japan Airlines technician, would take up the position as president in the aftermath of his passing. Major companies such as Toto Corporation, Daiichi Kuso Sangyo, Nippon Steel Corporation, Yasukawa Electric Corporation, Zenrin, and the Bank Yamaguchi would be attracted to the company, all investing in the company with an IPO being planned for the future. Starflyer would reach an agreement with ANA, in which ANA would provide training and training facilities for Starflyer personnel, along with maintenance, sales-related support, and other support. The airline's livery, which had been professionally designed by Flower Robotics, would be unveiled during 2005, which would lead the airline to win an award in the Good Design Awards New Frontier Design category, which is a big deal in Japan. The airline will receive its first A320, registered Juliet Alpha 01 Mike Charlie, and named the city Kitakyushu in December, with the airline receiving their air operator certificate from the Japanese Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism in January 2006. The second A320 would be received at the end of January, along with being given the green light to operate flights from Haneda. Services would be planned to commence upon the opening of new Kitakyushu Airport on March 16, 2006. One of their A320s would actually be the first ever aircraft to land at the airport, which would mark the beginning of operations at Kitakyushu. Services would commence on time, with Haneda and Kitakyushu on March 16th, and gradually, frequencies and flights would increase, with the third A320 being delivered at the end of February. The airline would see roughly a 57% load factor on its flights during the first year of operations, making a loss which was primarily attributed to a lack of name recognition and cost-related startup costs. In order to drive traffic, they'd launch a mileage program called Starlink in the latter half of 2006, which would incentivize customers to remain loyal to the airline. Another A320 would be picked up in February 2007, bringing the fleet up to 4 aircrafts. Services from Kansai to Haneda would be added in September, and ANA would pick up 100 billion yen, or the equivalent of 1% stake in the company, along with commencing code-sharing with Starflyer. This would increase load factors up to 70%, which would serve to stabilize the company for the time being. Starflyer would also reach an agreement with Jeju Air to handle their operations on their Seoul to Kitakyushu route, and this partnership would also open up the doorway for potentially expanding into fully scheduled international services between Seoul and Kitakyushu for themselves. However, before they could look into this seriously, the 2008 financial crisis would hit. In the aftermath of the crisis, President Takaaki and Managing Director Yasuki would be given the boot due to poor financial performance, with Shinichi Unihara, a former Mitsui & Company employee with no experience in the airline business, taking up the mantle as president. Seiichi Saika, another ANA executive, would take up Yasuki's position as well. In a press release, the airline would announce that they would launch an IPO in 2011, and they aimed to become profitable by entering the competitive Fukuoka to Haneda market, as well as entering a partnership with Air Busan. 2011 will be a busy year, with Starflyer slated to receive additional A320s, as well as launching services between Fukuoka and Haneda, as well as launching their IPO offering 230,000 shares, and raising an estimated 730 million yen. Starflyer had also reached an agreement with Delta to handle their ground servicing at Haneda, after launching a dedicated ground handling services once Haneda reopened to scheduled international traffic. In 2012, Starflyer commenced scheduled international services between Busan and Kitakyushu, marking a new chapter in the airline's history. ANA would also increase their stake in the airline from roughly 1% to about 18%, becoming the largest shareholder in the company. This would allow Starflyer to outright purchase their first aircraft rather than leasing, bringing their fleet up to 8 aircraft. These moves would bring the airline into profitability, however, it wouldn't last long. The airline would become a designated domestic air carrier, which, as we discussed, allowed them to recertify their pilots in-house under certain circumstances rather than completely relying on the MLITT for pilot recertification. And because of this, Starflyer improved their training by buying an A320 trainer. Charter flights between Guam and Kitakyushu would commence during August 2013. Along with this, 2013 would see the addition of flights between Kansai and Fukuoka. At the start of 2014, the airline opened up a maintenance hangar at Kitakyushu Airport, which would serve to simplify operations. The airline's first 3 aircrafts would be returned to their leasers during 2014, and later that year, Starflyer would pull the plug on Kitakyushu to Busan and Kansai to Fukuoka in favor of operating flights from Central. Services between Fukuoka and Central would commence in March, and 2 days after commencing services, President Shinichi would resign from his position, and you guessed it, he'd be replaced by yet another ANA executive. This time, Yoshimi Matsuishi would take up the mantle as president. I think I got that name right, this is like my 15th try. Anyways, another A320 would be pulled during the aftermath of this, bringing the fleet down to 8 aircrafts. Services to Yamaguchi Ubi from Haneda would be commenced during October, closing out the tumultuous year. These changes would positively impact the airline, bringing the airline yet again back into profitability. Besides closing down their ground handling services division in 2016, the rest of the year would be quiet. In 2017, Starflyer moves flights from Haneda's Terminal 2 to Terminal 1, along with adding services to Naha from Kitakyushu for the summer season. By 2018, the airline was up to 11 aircrafts, and services from Naha to Kitakyushu would be brought back for the summer season as well. The main event would actually be the expansion of international flights, with services to Taipei, Taiwan from Kitakyushu and Central. As we're all familiar with, the pandemic would put a pause on global air travel. Starflyer had paused its international routes, and overall, they'd make significant losses throughout the years. The airline would gradually thread through the pandemic, with international operations resuming once restrictions were lifted in 2023. Starflyer leased 5 A320neos from ANA, along with signing an engine MRO agreement with Lufthansa Technik. However, only 3 aircrafts would be received to date, due to Airbus's aircraft delivery delays. The airline, meanwhile, would pull 4 A320s, which would cause flight disruptions down the line, with initially 200 flights being cancelled, to all international flights being cancelled for the winter 2025 season. Anyways, that's the overall summary of Starflyer's history to date. I hope you enjoyed, and I'd appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, all that shit. It means a lot to me, and as you can tell, I'm exhausted. Anyways, I'm gonna go here. Peace.